When the doctor told me my mother had stomach cancer, I froze. Daniel didn't. He looked at the floor, rubbed his temples, and said, "We can't afford to treat her. You need to let this go. Let this go." The woman who raised me, who worked double shifts to buy me a college application, now a burden. And when I begged, he offered a solution. "If you sign the divorce papers, I'll give you half the savings. Do what you want." I thought he was cruel. I thought he was cold. I didn't know he was lying, because 2 weeks later I found out my mother wasn't dying at all, but someone else's was, his. I didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because the math didn't add up. Daniel said we had no money for treatment, but 2 weeks earlier, we'd put down a deposit on a vacation home. He'd just upgraded his phone. He bought our son Caleb a $1,000 gaming chair just because. So when he looked me in the eye and said, "I'm sorry, Rachel, we just can't save everyone," something inside me snapped. The next morning, I called the hospital myself. I wasn't supposed to have access to the records. They were under Daniel's insurance, but I used my maiden name, pulled a favor, and asked for a second opinion. And that's when everything unraveled. Ma'am, the nurse said gently, "Are you sure your mother's name is Linda Parker?" "Yes, because the file you're referencing, Marilyn Moore, that's the one with the stage 3 gastric carcinoma." Marilyn, Daniel's mother. I hung up without thanking her. My legs were shaking, not with grief, with clarity. He'd lied. He used my mother's fear, my grief, as leverage. He watched me cry over a woman he knew wasn't dying, all so I would sign away the marriage, the house, and half of everything. I thought about confronting him, screaming, but I didn't. I did something worse. I started planning. I took screenshots of the messages he sent me about the urgent bills. I compiled every bank transaction, every invoice. I made a spreadsheet that would make an IRS agent blush, and I smiled every time I typed the words, "He lied." Here's proof. Then I waited for the moment when Marilyn would finally collapse, when the truth couldn't stay buried under "you're being emotional and you always overreact," when Daniel would look me in the face again and realize I'd known all along, and that I wasn't going to save him. Daniel thought he was playing chess, but he underestimated the woman who used to balance 3 jobs and still made dinner from scratch. He didn't notice that I'd stopped asking about money, that I no longer begged him to talk to doctors, that I smiled when he said, "Maybe your mom's illness is just fate." I let him believe I was grieving. In reality, I was collecting. At night, after Caleb went to bed, Daniel would FaceTime Marilyn from the study. He thought I didn't know, but the house had thin walls and thick echoes. "I'm trying, Mom," he whispered one night. "I just need her to sign the final agreement. Once she's out, we can sell the house. You'll get your treatment. I promise." I didn't cry. I emailed the audio to myself. Then I booked a consultation with a lawyer named Erica Shaw. She was precise, no nonsense, and unimpressed by male manipulation. After 30 minutes of reviewing my documents, she looked up and said, "He tried to flip the script and bury you under guilt. That was a mistake. What do I do now?" She leaned back in her chair. "We don't burn him yet. We bleed him slowly. For the next 2 weeks, I acted like the perfect ex-wife-to-be. I cooked. I smiled. I signed nothing. And Daniel grew impatient. He started slipping, forgetting what lies he'd told me, mixing up timelines, leaving hospital paperwork in coat pockets. That's how I got the discharge form from the oncology unit with Marilyn's name clearly printed across the top. She'd been admitted for chemotherapy 3 days before he told me my mother was terminal. Meanwhile, my mother, she was recovering beautifully from a stomach ulcer. The irony was almost biblical. One night, I left the discharge form taped to the fridge. No note, no explanation. Daniel saw it at 6:42 a.m. By 6:45, he was in the hallway yelling, "Where did you get that I didn't flinch?" "I live here," I said. Remember, he opened his mouth, then shut it. Because he knew, and worse, he knew I knew. That was the beginning of the end. For him. After that morning, Daniel didn't yell again. He got quiet. Scared men don't rage, they scramble. He started locking his phone, changing passwords, leaving the house earlier, coming home later. He told Caleb I was going through something and needed space. I let him talk, let him build his little web, because I had something better than panic. I had timing. That week, I reached out to an old acquaintance, Hannah Reese, investigative journalist, sharp as broken glass and twice as dangerous. She'd once covered local politician who embezzled money from his dying wife's foundation. I sent her an anonymous tip. Husband fakes wife's mom's cancer to steal assets. Real patient is his own mother. Documents available. She replied within hours. "Can you prove it?" I sent the screenshots, the audio, the insurance papers, Marilyn's discharge. She wrote, "I'll need your name eventually, but for now, let's get him nervous." Within 72 hours, a teaser article went live. Headline: Man chooses mother's life over wife's mother with his wife's money. It didn't name names, but Daniel recognized himself in every sentence. He stormed into the kitchen that night with his phone shaking in his hand. "Did you talk to anyone?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I thought you said we weren't allowed to save everyone." He stared at me like I'd grown claws. That's when Caleb walked in. He looked between us. "What's going on?" Daniel answered first. "Nothing. Adults are just talking." Caleb frowned. "Is it about Grandma?" Which one? I asked softly. That shut them both up. Later, Caleb came to me alone. "Dad said you're trying to take the house." I knelt in front of him. "I'm trying to take back what's mine." He didn't understand. Not yet, but soon he would. The day the full article dropped, my inbox imploded. Headline: She was told. Her mother was dying, so her husband could steal everything. My name wasn't redacted this time, neither was Daniel's. Within minutes, the comments section turned into a courtroom. Strangers dissected every line, every choice, every betrayal, and for once I wasn't on trial. He was. Daniel didn't come home that night. Instead, I got a text. "You had no right to air our private life." I didn't reply, because it wasn't private anymore. It was public record, a cautionary tale, a case study in how far a man would go to protect his mother, even if it meant destroying someone else's daughter. Hannah called the next morning. "The story's gone national. They're requesting follow-ups. Want to go on camera." "No," I said. "Let the story speak. My face isn't the headline. The truth is, but part of me did want to speak, not for revenge, for women like me, who are told to suffer quietly, who are gaslit until silence becomes muscle memory. I didn't owe Daniel anything anymore. Not discretion, not dignity, not mercy." That afternoon, Erica filed for divorce on grounds of fraud, emotional coercion, and financial manipulation. We submitted every document, every receipt, every lie he ever printed on official letterhead. When the papers hit his lawyer's desk, I got a call from Marilyn. Her voice was thin, breathless. "Please, Rachel, you're hurting Caleb." I said nothing. She continued. "Daniel made mistakes, but families I cut her off. Families don't forge medical records to steal inheritances. Silence. Tell your son to vacate the house by end of week, or the sheriff will do it for him. Click. No tears. No regrets. Because I'd spent years shrinking myself to fit their version of loyalty, and I was done apologizing for refusing to die quietly. Daniel didn't move out by the end of the week, so the sheriff did it for him. He stood on the porch with a trash bag and a look I didn't recognize somewhere between panic and disbelief, like the man who once calculated every step suddenly couldn't do basic math. "You did this," he said, voice low. "No," I corrected. "You did this. I just turned the lights on." The sheriff didn't flinch. He watched Daniel walk down the steps like a man heading to his own sentencing. Marilyn wasn't with him. She'd checked herself into a care facility a week earlier, quietly. Shame is a lonely disease. Caleb chose to leave too. "I want to stay with Dad," he said, arms crossed. "At least he doesn't use the internet to destroy people." That hurt. Not because it wasn't cruel, but because it wasn't true. I didn't destroy anyone. I exposed them. Still, I let him go. Not because I gave up, but because I'd finally accepted blood isn't proof of loyalty. It's just biology. The house felt too quiet at first. I cleaned the kitchen 3 times in one night just to hear a sound that wasn't my own thoughts. But then I started breathing easier. I changed the locks, repainted the walls, donated everything Daniel ever picked out, especially that ugly overpriced sofa he claimed was Italian leather but smelled like secrets and mold. The donations guy asked, "Are you sure you want to get rid of all of this?" I smiled. I'm sure I should have done it years ago. That weekend, the story hit primetime. Hannah sent me a link, Wife Turned Survivor, How Rachel Moore Reclaimed Her Life and Her Voice. I didn't watch it live. I was too busy cooking dinner for my mom. Real family. But the next morning, I woke up to hundreds of emails. From women, from daughters, from strangers who said, "Thank you for not staying quiet. You helped me leave. You made me believe I'm not crazy." And just like that, my silence had become someone else's oxygen. I never intended to become a voice for anything. But sometimes when you survive loudly enough, people start to listen. Emails turned into interview requests. Articles turned into panels. One university asked if I'd speak to their women's law class, not as a victim, the professor said, but as someone who understood the system and still broke it open. I said yes. The first time I stood on stage, I expected my hands to shake. They didn't. I looked out over a room full of young faces and said, "You will meet people who ask you to choose between love and truth. If you have to choose, always pick truth. Real love won't make you pick." They clapped. But I didn't speak for applause. I spoke because I knew what it felt like to be gaslit into silence, to apologize for asking questions, to be told that love means sacrificing yourself quietly. Never again. Back home, life became simple. Mom was recovering well. She baked again. We fought over crossword puzzles and grocery lists. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt honest. One afternoon, while clearing out the attic, I found an old photo Daniel, me, and Caleb on a beach trip before the rot surfaced. We looked happy. But I remembered that day clearly. Daniel had screamed at the hotel manager over a billing error. Caleb had thrown sand at another kid. I'd spent the night crying in the bathroom. The photo lied. I tossed it into the shredder. Freedom isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's just the absence of dread. And that I'd decided was enough. Noah Caldwell, the reporter from Hannah's team, emailed me personally a few days later. Off the record, he wrote, "You changed more than a headline. You changed the temperature." I replied, "Good. Let it stay cold for the ones who thrive in shadows." The letter came in early spring. No return address, just my name in Caleb's handwriting, inside one page. I didn't know everything. I was angry. Maybe I still am, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry. I hope Grandma's okay. I hope you're okay. Caleb, I read it twice, then once more. It didn't make me cry. It didn't make me rush to call or text or mend what was broken, because apologies aren't bandages, and I'd already stopped bleeding. I placed the letter in a drawer, not to save it, but to set it down. A memory, not a weight. Marilyn passed away a few weeks later. I didn't attend the funeral. I sent no flowers. She'd made her choice. So had I. Daniel resurfaced in an interview denial wrapped in guilt. I was doing what I thought was best, he said. My mother was dying. I was desperate. But desperation doesn't justify betrayal. It just explains the speed. The journalist asked, "Would you do it again?" He paused, then nodded. And just like that, the world remembered why I left. I started traveling more, nothing dramatic. Just small towns with good coffee and quiet lakes. Places where no one recognized me as the woman from that article. One night, in a diner outside Flagstaff, a waitress asked, "You traveling alone?" "Yes," I said. She smiled. "Good for you." And it was, not because I didn't need anyone, but because I finally knew what I did need: peace, truth, room to stretch without shrinking. Freedom didn't feel loud anymore. It felt soft, like silence I didn't fear. I stopped chasing closure. It doesn't exist, not the way people imagine it. There's no final conversation that makes it all make sense. No apology that rewinds the damage. What exists is this: the quiet knowledge that you don't owe anyone forgiveness to be whole. I started gardening. Not metaphorically, actual dirt seeds water. I grew herbs in the kitchen window, tomatoes on the back porch. There was something healing about watching something thrive just because I cared for it. No expectations, no betrayals, just growth. One afternoon, Mom stood next to me while I trimmed basil. "You seem lighter," she said. "I am." She smiled. "You were always strong. You just forgot." She was right. Not because I'd changed, but because I'd finally remembered who I was before I became someone else's convenience. The book deal came unexpectedly. A small publisher. Memoir meets manifesto. They didn't want drama. They wanted clarity. I gave them both. Chapter titles like "The Day He Chose His Mother's Life Over Mine," "Don't Mistake Silence for Consent," "Blood Isn't Family." Truth is, it didn't make me rich, but it made me heard. People asked if I'd ever reconcile with Caleb. I said I hope he finds peace, but I'm not his proving ground. People asked if I'd ever date again. I said maybe, but I'm not looking. I already came home to myself. One night, I stood outside on the porch with a cup of tea. Wind in the trees, moon sharp and full. I whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to the version of me that didn't quit. The one who read the lies saw the betrayal and said, "Not this time." By summer, I had a rhythm. Mornings with coffee and a walk. Afternoons spent writing, consulting, teaching. Evenings with books, phone calls with Mom, and playlists that didn't remind me of anyone but me. I didn't check Daniel's socials. Didn't ask mutual friends how Caleb was doing. Not because I didn't care, but because caring was no longer my currency. Letting go didn't mean erasing the past. It meant refusing to carry it like a debt I never owed. A podcast host reached out. "Can we interview you on surviving betrayal?" "No," I said, "but I can talk about building something better after." She liked that more. We recorded from my kitchen. I told the story not as someone who was wronged, but as someone who righted everything that tried to bury her. "You sound angry," someone messaged afterward. No, I sounded free. One evening, I drove to the ocean. Just me. No agenda. No one waiting on a text. I stood at the edge of the water, toes in the surf, and thought, this is what he tried to take. Not my money, not my house, not even my family. My stillness, my space, myself. And I had it back now. Fully. Finally. Someone once told me healing is just grief with nowhere else to go. But I don't believe that. Healing is the moment you realize you're no longer holding your breath. And for the first time in years, I wasn't. The anniversary came and went. Not the wedding, not the divorce. The day I chose me. There was no party, no toast, no look at me now post. Just a quiet dinner with my mom. Her laugh still soft, her appetite fully back. Proof that not everything sick stays broken. After dessert, she said, "I'm proud of you, you know." I nodded. I know. I just needed to be proud of me, too. I'd reached a place people don't talk about enough. The after. Not the revenge, not the rising. The part where nothing dramatic happens. Because peace is finally louder than pain. Caleb hadn't written again. Daniel's name hadn't appeared in my inbox, and I didn't wait for either. I planted lavender in the front yard, started learning to cook for pleasure, not necessity. Bought a secondhand record player just because the sound was messy and alive. I laughed more, slept better, trusted my gut faster. One afternoon, I found the final legal document confirming my full ownership of the house. No liens, no shared claims, just my name, Rachel Moore. I stared at it for a long time, not to read it, to feel it. Everything they tried to take my sanity, my softness, my story I now held in my own hands. I didn't forgive them, I didn't forget, but I moved forward anyway. Not out of grace, out of choice, because survival isn't the end of the story. Living well is.